The iron gates of Ashford Manor always made Elena's stomach twist into knots. Not because they were intimidating, though they certainly were, towering 12 feet high with gold-tipped spears pointing toward the sky. No, it was what lay beyond those gates that made her feel small, the perfectly trimmed hedges that probably cost more to maintain than her family's monthly rent. The fountain in the circular driveway with its marble angels spitting water. The mansion itself, all white columns and huge windows that seemed to judge anyone who wasn't born into wealth. "Come on, mija. We can't be late today," her mother Rosa said softly, touching Elena's shoulder. At 42, Rosa Martinez had the kind of tired eyes that came from working 2 jobs and still wondering if the bills would get paid on time. She wore her usual uniform, a simple gray dress with white trim, sensible shoes that didn't make noise on the Ashfords' expensive floors. Her dark hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful. Elena followed her mother through the side entrance. Never the front door. That was for the Ashfords and their guests. People like them used the servants' entrance near the kitchen, a plain wooden door that led to a narrow hallway with linoleum floors instead of marble. "You remember the rules, right?" Rosa asked as they walked through the dimly lit corridor. Her voice had that nervous edge it always got on gala days. "Stay in the servants' quarters. Don't touch anything. Be invisible," Elena recited. She'd heard it 100 times. Maybe 1,000. "I'm serious, Elena. Mrs. Ashford is already stressed about the charity event tonight. We cannot give her any reason to—" Rosa trailed off, but Elena knew how that sentence ended. Any reason to fire us. Any reason to tell her friends that the help was getting too comfortable. Any reason to remind them exactly where they belonged in the world. The servants' quarters was a small room near the back of the house, tucked between the laundry room and the storage closet. It had a worn couch that sagged in the middle, a coffee table with water rings permanently stained into the wood, and a tiny window that looked out onto the garbage bins. Elena had spent every Saturday here for the past 3 years while her mother cleaned the 20-room mansion. She dropped her backpack onto the couch and pulled out her geometry homework. The numbers and angles usually helped her escape, lose herself in problems that actually had solutions, unlike the complicated mess of real life. But today the house was buzzing with a different kind of energy. Through the walls, Elena could hear voices, Mrs. Ashford barking orders at the event coordinator, Mr. Ashford's deep laugh from somewhere upstairs, the florist asking where to put the arrangements, staff members hurrying back and forth preparing for the gala that would transform the manor into something even more excessive than usual. "The Ashfords are raising money for a youth music conservatory," Rosa had explained during the bus ride over. "Very important people will be here. Musicians, donors, politicians. Everything must be perfect." Elena tried to focus on her homework, but the house kept pulling at her attention. Around noon she heard it, the sound that made her heart skip and her fingers tingle. Piano music drifting through the vents and walls. She knew she shouldn't. But her feet moved anyway, carrying her out of the servants' quarters and through the maze of hallways. She stayed close to the walls, making herself small, practically invisible, a skill she'd perfected over the years. The music led her to the grand ballroom. The doors were open just a crack, and Elena peered through. Her breath caught in her throat. The piano sat in the center of the room like a queen on a throne, a massive Steinway grand in glossy black. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, and tall windows let in streams of afternoon sunlight that made everything glow. At the piano sat Victoria Ashford, 17 years old and everything Elena wasn't. Blonde hair that moved like it was in a shampoo commercial. Perfect posture from years of deportment classes. A dress that probably cost more than Rosa made in a month. But her playing, Victoria hit a wrong note. Then another. She stopped, groaned dramatically, and slumped over the keys. "This is impossible," Victoria whined to someone Elena couldn't see. "Why do I have to perform anyway? It's not like anyone actually cares about the music. They just want to drink champagne and feel good about donating money." "Because, Victoria, you are an Ashford," came Mrs. Ashford's clipped voice. She stepped into view, wearing a cream pantsuit and holding a tablet. "We have standards to uphold. Now from the top. And please try to remember the tempo this time." Victoria rolled her eyes but started again. Elena's fingers began to move against her side, unconsciously mimicking the piece. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. She knew it by heart. Her father had taught it to her when she was 9. Making her practice the fingering on their kitchen table when they couldn't afford a real piano. even without looking at her hands. Elena knew exactly where Victoria was going wrong. Her left hand was too heavy, drowning out the melody. The tempo was rushed, anxious. There was no feeling in it, no understanding of what Chopin was trying to say about longing and beauty and sadness all mixed together. Elena's fingers danced faster, playing the piece properly against the empty air, lost in the memory of her father's voice. Music is not about perfect notes, mi amor. It's about perfect emotion. You must feel it here, he'd said, touching her chest right over her heart. What are you doing here? Elena's hands froze. Her eyes snapped forward. Mrs. Ashford stood in the doorway of the ballroom staring at her with the kind of look someone might give to a stray dog that wandered onto their property. I'm sorry. I heard the music and I just... Elena's words tumbled out. You just what? Decided the rules don't apply to you? Mrs. Ashford's voice was ice. She walked closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. This area is off limits to staff and their family members. Behind her, Victoria had stopped playing and turned around on the piano bench. She looked at Elena with a mixture of curiosity and amusement, like she was some kind of interesting bug. I was just listening, Elena said quietly. I didn't touch anything. The piano is a very expensive instrument. A very expensive, very delicate instrument. Mrs. Ashford crossed her arms. I don't think I need to explain why certain things aren't meant for people like you. People like you. 3 words that carried the weight of everything Elena hated about coming here. 3 words that summed up every assumption, every locked door, every moment of being treated as less than. Of course. I'm sorry, Elena said, backing away. Her cheeks burned with shame and anger mixed together, a familiar combination. See that it doesn't happen again, Mrs. Ashford said dismissively, already turning back to her daughter. Victoria, continue. We have 4 hours until guests arrive. Elena hurried back through the hallways, her vision blurry with tears she refused to let fall. Not here, not where they could see. She made it back to the servants' quarters and collapsed onto the saggy couch, her hands shaking. Through the walls, she could hear Victoria start the Chopin again, stumbling through the same passages, making the same mistakes. Elena closed her eyes and played it perfectly in her mind, her fingers moving against her jeans, creating music that only she could hear. The gala went exactly as expected. Elena watched from the servants' quarters window as luxury cars pulled up, one after another. Women in glittering gowns and men in tuxedos stepped out, laughing and chatting like they didn't have a care in the world. Probably because they didn't. Victoria performed her Chopin piece. Elena heard it through the walls, every mistake, every rushed measure. The applause that followed was polite but brief. Elena wondered if anyone in that room actually cared about the music, or if Mrs. Ashford had been right when she said they just wanted to feel good about writing checks. By 11 o'clock, the last guests had left. By midnight, the house had gone quiet except for the soft footsteps of catering staff packing up. By 1 in the morning, even those sounds had faded away. Elena lay on the couch staring at the ceiling. Her mother had gone home hours ago, taking the bus back to their small apartment across town. But the Ashfords had asked Rosa to come back early tomorrow morning to help clean up after the event, so Elena had permission to stay overnight in the servants' quarters. It happened sometimes on gala nights or when Mrs. Ashford had important dinner parties. Usually Elena didn't mind. It was quiet, and she could finish her homework without her little brother pestering her or the neighbors arguing through thin walls. But tonight she couldn't stop thinking about that piano. She sat up. The house was completely silent now, dark, except for the security lights in the hallways. Everyone was asleep. The Ashfords' rooms were on the 3rd floor, far away. The overnight security guard usually did his rounds outside, checking the grounds. Elena knew she shouldn't. The warning from Mrs. Ashford still echoed in her head. But her feet were already moving, carrying her out of the servants' quarters and through the dark hallways. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure it would wake someone up. The ballroom doors were closed but unlocked. Elena slipped inside and quietly shut the door behind her. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, painting everything in shades of silver and blue. And there it was, the Steinway, magnificent and patient, waiting. Elena walked toward it slowly, almost reverently. Her hands trembled as she touched the smooth, cool surface. She'd never touched a real grand piano before. Never. The closest she'd gotten was the electronic keyboard at her school's music room, and even that was usually occupied by kids who actually took piano lessons. She sat down on the bench. It was the perfect height, cushioned leather that probably cost more than her family's couch. She lifted the fallboard, revealing the keys. Even in the dim light they gleamed. 88 keys, black and white, each one a doorway to something beautiful. Elena placed her hands on the keys, her fingers finding their position automatically. Middle C under her right thumb. Everything her father had taught her came flooding back. His voice patient and warm, guiding her through scales and arpeggios on their kitchen table. Imagine the sound, mi amor. Hear it in your head and your fingers will remember. She pressed down gently, playing a soft C major scale. The sound that came out was like nothing she'd ever heard. Rich, full, perfect, not tinny like the electronic keyboard. Not imaginary like when she practiced on paper. Real. Absolutely real. Tears pricked her eyes. She thought about her father, about how he'd given up his concert career to move to this country, to give his family a better life, how he'd worked in a restaurant kitchen by day and tried to teach private lessons at night, how he'd died in a car accident coming home from a student's house, leaving them with nothing but memories and a love of music that had nowhere to go. I wish you could see this. Papa, she whispered to the empty room, then she began to play. Really play. Not Chopin's Nocturne that Victoria had butchered earlier. Something bigger. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the third movement. It was one of the most technically difficult pieces her father had taught her, full of rapid arpeggios and demanding passages that required both hands to move at lightning speed. Her fingers flew across the keys. The music poured out of her. Months and years of silent practice on paper keyboards suddenly given voice. Every emotion she'd held back. Every moment of frustration and longing and grief channeled through her hands into sound. The notes cascaded like a waterfall, powerful and urgent and alive. She didn't hold back. Couldn't hold back. This might be her only chance to ever play a real piano. So she played like she was saying goodbye to someone she loved. She played for her father, for her mother working 2 jobs, for every kid who ever got told that certain things weren't meant for people like them. The final notes rang out, echoing through the ballroom. Elena sat there breathing hard, her hands still resting on the keys. The silence that followed felt sacred somehow. Then came the sound of clapping. Slow, deliberate claps from somewhere behind her. Elena spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. An elderly woman stood near the doorway, wrapped in an elegant silk robe. She had white hair pinned up loosely and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. Margaret Ashford. The grandmother. The family matriarch who lived in the private wing of the manor. "I'm sorry," Elena stammered, jumping up from the bench. "I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have. I'll leave." "Sit down," Margaret said. Her voice was firm but not angry. She walked closer, moving slowly with the help of a silver-handled cane. "I said sit down, child." Elena sat, her whole body shaking. She was caught. Mrs. Ashford would fire her mother. They'd lose this job, and Rosa needed this job. And it was all Elena's fault because she couldn't control herself around a stupid piano. Margaret lowered herself onto a nearby chair, studying Elena with those penetrating eyes. "I was sleeping when I heard music. At first I thought it was a recording. Then I thought perhaps my son had hired a pianist I didn't know about. But then I came down here and saw you." "Please don't tell Mrs. Ashford," Elena blurted out. "My mom needs this job. I know I wasn't supposed to touch it, but I've never..." Her words tangled together, desperate and rushed. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Margaret asked, cutting through Elena's panic. The question caught her off guard. My father taught me." "Your father must be an excellent teacher. Is he a concert pianist?" Elena's throat tightened. "He was, back in Argentina before we came here. He died 6 years ago." Something softened in Margaret's expression. "I'm sorry, truly, but he taught you well. That was Beethoven's Opus 27, number 2, third movement. One of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. You played it flawlessly." Elena didn't know what to say. No one had ever complimented her playing before. No one except her father. And he'd been gone so long that sometimes she wondered if she'd imagined how good he said she was. "I don't have a piano," Elena said quietly. "I haven't played on a real one since he died. We couldn't afford one. So I practice on paper. I draw keyboards and I practice the fingering and I hear the music in my head, but it's not the same. It's not..." She trailed off, realizing she was rambling to this woman who probably thought she was crazy. But Margaret was nodding slowly, like what Elena said made perfect sense. You've been practicing on paper keyboards for 6 years? Yes, ma'am. And you played that piece entirely from memory? Your father taught you years ago and you've kept it alive in your mind all this time. Elena nodded. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, just looking at Elena like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, she spoke. I don't know what my daughter-in-law said to you earlier today, but I can imagine. Catherine has very fixed ideas about how the world works, about who belongs where. Elena felt her cheeks burn, remembering Mrs. Ashford's words. Certain things aren't meant for people like you. But I'm old, Margaret continued. And one thing I've learned is that talent doesn't care about your last name or how much money your parents have. Talent shows up where it wants to, in whoever it chooses. And child, you have more talent in your little finger than most people have in their entire body. Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks before she could stop them. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. Margaret stood up, leaning on her cane. It's late. You should get some rest. But Elena, I'd like to hear you play again. Properly. Not sneaking around in the middle of the night like a criminal. She paused at the doorway, looking back. Your father would be very proud of you. Then she was gone, leaving Elena alone with the piano and the moonlight and the overwhelming feeling that maybe, just maybe, something had shifted in her world. The days following that night felt strange to Elena. Every time she passed Grandmother Margaret in the hallways, the old woman would give her a small nod, a tiny acknowledgement that their secret existed. Mrs. Ashford never said anything, which meant Margaret had kept her promise not to tell. But Elena could feel something brewing, like the air before a thunderstorm. The annual charity gala arrived 3 weeks later. This one was bigger than the last, Mrs. Ashford had explained to the staff during the morning briefing. Over 200 guests. The governor would be attending. A famous violinist, wealthy donors from across the state, and the centerpiece of the evening would be Victoria's piano performance, a complex piece by Rachmaninoff that would showcase the importance of supporting young musicians. Elena helped her mother with the preparations, staying carefully out of sight. She polished silver in the kitchen, folded napkins in the service area, did whatever small tasks kept her invisible. Through the windows, she watched the event staff transform the gardens with fairy lights and the ballroom with enormous flower arrangements that probably cost more than her mother's monthly salary. By 6 o'clock, Rosa sent Elena back to the servants' quarters. Stay there until this is over, her mother said, worry creasing her forehead. Big crowd tonight. More people means more chances for something to go wrong. Elena nodded and retreated to the small room that had become her second home. She could hear the guests arriving, the swell of conversation and laughter, the clink of champagne glasses. Classical music played through the sound system, probably to set the mood before the live performance. Around 7:30 she heard raised voices, not the pleasant party kind, angry voices coming from somewhere close by. Elena cracked open the door and peeked out. Down the hall near the family's private sitting room she could see Mrs. Ashford and Victoria arguing. I can't do it, Mother. I can't. Victoria's voice was high and panicked. I've been trying to tell you for weeks, but you wouldn't listen. What do you mean you can't do it? You've been practicing every day. No, I haven't. Victoria's voice cracked. I've been pretending. I thought I could learn it in time, but it's too hard. It's Rachmaninoff, Mother. It's literally one of the most difficult pieces ever written. I'm not good enough. The silence that followed was worse than the yelling. When Mrs. Ashford finally spoke, her voice was ice. Do you understand what you've done? The governor is here. The press is here. The entire program lists you as the featured performance. What am I supposed to tell 200 people? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Victoria was crying now. Tell them I'm sick. Tell them anything. But I can't go out there and humiliate myself. I'll mess it up and everyone will know I'm a fraud. Elena quietly closed the door, her heart pounding. She shouldn't have heard that. She definitely shouldn't have heard that. She sat back down on the couch, trying to focus on her biology textbook, but the words swam on the page. 20 minutes later, someone knocked on the door. Elena jumped. Yes? The door opened, and Grandmother Margaret stood there, still elegant in a deep blue evening gown. Come with me, dear. I'm supposed to stay here, Elena said nervously. I know, but I'm asking you to come anyway. Margaret's tone left no room for argument. Elena followed her through the hallways, her stomach churning. They went to the family sitting room, where Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Ashford, and Victoria were in the middle of a crisis. Mrs. Ashford's perfect composure had cracked. Mr. Ashford looked confused and frustrated, and Victoria sat on the couch with mascara running down her face. "Mother, this is not the time," Mrs. Ashford said when she saw them enter. "Actually, Catherine, this is exactly the time." Margaret gestured to Elena. "This young woman can play the piece Victoria was supposed to perform." The room went silent. 3 pairs of eyes turned to stare at Elena. Then Victoria laughed. It was a sharp, almost hysterical sound. "Her? You think the maid's daughter can play Rachmaninoff?" "I know she can," Margaret said calmly. "I've heard her play Beethoven flawlessly." Mrs. Ashford shook her head. "Mother, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this is absurd. She's never had formal training. She's never performed for anyone. And even if by some miracle she could play the notes, we can't put her on that stage. Not in front of the governor. Not in front of our peers. What would people think? They'd think we support talented young musicians, which is literally the entire point of this charity," Margaret said, her voice sharp now. "Or is this conservatory fund only meant for certain types of children?" Mr. Ashford cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could postpone the performance, make an announcement that Victoria is ill, and lose face completely. Have people talk about how the Ashfords can't deliver on their promises." Margaret turned to Elena. "Can you play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2? Elena's mouth went dry. She knew the piece. Her father had taught her the solo part when she was 12, making her play it over and over on their kitchen table until she dreamed about the notes. But that was years ago, and she'd never played it on a real piano, and the idea of playing it in front of 200 people made her want to throw up. I know it," she whispered, "but I've never, see? She knows it," Margaret said triumphantly. Victoria stood up, anger replacing her tears. "This is insane. She's probably never even touched a decent piano. You really want to risk the entire evening on someone who—" She looked Elena up and down with disgust. On someone like her? Elena felt heat rush to her cheeks. There it was again. Someone like her. She wanted to run back to the servants' quarters, to hide, to disappear, but something in Grandmother Margaret's eyes stopped her. "What do you have to lose, Catherine?" Margaret asked. "Your daughter can't perform. You need someone who can, unless your pride is more important than the actual charity." Mrs. Ashford looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. She glanced at her husband, who shrugged helplessly. The clock on the mantel showed 7:55. The performance was scheduled for 8:15. "Fine," Mrs. Ashford finally said. "But if she embarrasses this family, Mother, this is on you." Elena's legs felt weak. This was really happening. They were going to put her on stage in front of all those people, in front of the governor, the press, wealthy donors who came to judge and be impressed. "There's just one thing," Elena said quietly. Everyone looked at her. Can I play it for my mom? She's never heard me play on a real piano. She doesn't even know I still practice. I'd like her to be there." For a moment, no one said anything. Then Victoria laughed again, this time joined by a few of her friends who had gathered in the hallway, apparently drawn by the commotion. One of them, a tall girl in a designer dress, peeked into the room. "Oh my God, is this really happening? You're going to let the maid's daughter perform?" The girl pulled out her phone. "This is going to be incredible. Like disaster incredible. Can she even read music?" Another voice asked, followed by giggles. Victoria wiped her eyes and looked at Elena with something between pity and amusement. "She wants to play for her mommy. That's so sweet. Maybe she can play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. That's about her level, right?" The laughter grew louder. More of Victoria's friends crowded the doorway, whispering and snickering. Elena felt herself getting smaller, shrinking under their stares and their mockery. She shouldn't have asked. She shouldn't have said anything about her mother. Now they all thought she was a joke. "Enough," Margaret said sharply. The laughter died down a bit, but Elena could still hear whispers, still see the smirks on their faces. Mrs. Ashford pinched the bridge of her nose. "Someone find Rosa Martinez. Tell her to come to the ballroom." She looked at Elena with barely concealed disdain. "You'll have 5 minutes to warm up. Don't touch the piano before then. And for God's sake, someone find her something appropriate to wear. We can't have her performing in jeans." As Elena was ushered out of the room by one of the event coordinators, she heard Victoria's voice behind her. This is going to be the most embarrassing moment of her life. I almost feel bad. Almost. The coordinator, a woman named Helen with kind eyes, took Elena to a small dressing room. "Don't listen to them, honey," she said gently, pulling out a simple black dress from a garment bag. "You just focus on the music, okay?" But as Elena changed into the dress, her hands shaking so badly she could barely zip it up, she couldn't stop thinking about all those faces out there. All those people who already decided she would fail, who were probably hoping she would fail, just so they could have a story to tell at their next dinner party about the time the Ashfords let the help perform at a gala. Through the walls, she could hear the crowd settling down, preparing for the performance. Someone was making an announcement. She couldn't hear the words, but she could imagine them. And somewhere in that crowd of silk and diamonds and judgment, her mother was being brought in, probably terrified and confused. Elena looked at herself in the mirror. The dress fit barely. Her hands were trembling. Her throat felt tight. She looked exactly like what they all thought she was. Someone who didn't belong, someone who was about to prove them all right. Helen walked Elena to the side entrance of the ballroom. Through the crack in the door, Elena could see the crowd. 200 people in evening gowns and tuxedos, seated in neat rows of chairs, champagne glasses still in hand. The Steinway sat on a small stage at the front, spotlit and waiting. It looked impossibly far away. "You'll be fine," Helen whispered, giving Elena's shoulder a squeeze. "Just breathe." But Elena couldn't breathe. Her chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around her ribs and kept pulling it tighter. Her hands were cold and clammy. What was she thinking? She couldn't do this. She was 16 years old, the daughter of a housekeeper, and she was about to walk out in front of governors and millionaires and tell them she could play one of the hardest piano pieces ever written. On stage, Mr. Ashford stood at a microphone. His voice boomed through the speakers, smooth and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a slight change to this evening's program. My daughter Victoria has taken ill, but we're fortunate to have another talented young musician who will perform for us tonight. Please welcome Elena Martinez." The applause was polite but confused. Elena heard the whispers starting immediately, saw heads turning to neighbors, questioning looks exchanged. She forced her feet to move, walking out onto the stage on legs that didn't feel like her own. The lights were bright, too bright. She couldn't see individual faces anymore, just a sea of dark figures and the occasional glint of jewelry or glasses. She made it to the piano bench and sat down, her borrowed dress feeling strange against her skin. That's when she saw her, in the very back row, standing against the wall because all the seats were taken, was her mother. Rosa still wore her gray uniform. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and even from this distance, Elena could see the fear on her face. Fear that her daughter was about to fail in front of all these important people. Fear that this would cost them everything. The whispers grew louder. Elena caught fragments of conversations. Who is she? Never heard of her. Is this some kind of joke? She looks terrified. In the third row, she spotted Victoria sitting between her friends, arms crossed, a smirk on her face. One of the friends leaned over and whispered something that made them both giggle. Elena's cheeks burned. She looked down at the keys. 88 keys, black and white, the same as they'd been that night when she played for Grandmother Margaret. The same as every paper keyboard she'd ever drawn. The same as the keys her father had taught her on, back when the world made sense and music was just something beautiful they shared. Her hands were shaking as she placed them in position. She could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears louder than anything else. This was a mistake. She should stand up, apologize, run off the stage before she humiliated herself and her mother, and proved everyone right about exactly where people like them belonged. Then, from somewhere in the audience, she heard it, a voice just barely loud enough to carry. "This should be entertaining," followed by quiet laughter. Something shifted inside Elena. She thought about her father working in a restaurant kitchen even though his hands were meant for pianos. She thought about her mother, scrubbing other people's toilets at 42 years old. She thought about every person who had ever looked at her like she was less than, like she was invisible, like she didn't matter. She took a breath. Then she began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the ballroom. Soft at first, like a question being asked, her right hand carried the melody, while her left hand provided the gentle, rolling accompaniment. The shaking in her hands disappeared. They knew what to do. They'd always known. The audience was still whispering. She could feel their skepticism. Their amusement, waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting to be proven right. Then the piece shifted. The tempo increased. Both hands moved faster, the notes cascading like water, like light, like everything beautiful her father had ever tried to teach her about music. Her fingers flew across the keys, hitting every note with perfect precision. The melody soared, aching and passionate and powerful. The whispers stopped. Elena didn't notice. She was somewhere else now, lost in the music. She saw her father's face, the way he'd smile when she got a difficult passage right. She felt his presence like he was standing right beside her, guiding her through every measure. Feel it, mi amor. Don't just play it. Feel it. She felt everything. Every ounce of grief for the father she'd lost. Every moment of frustration at being invisible. Every dream she'd kept locked inside because she thought it was impossible for someone like her. It all poured out through her fingers, transformed into sound. The ballroom had gone completely silent. 200 people sat frozen, forgetting to drink their champagne, forgetting to check their phones, forgetting everything except the music pouring out of this girl they'd dismissed seconds ago. In the third row, Victoria's smirk had vanished. Her mouth hung open slightly, shock written across her face. Near the back, a woman in a glittering gold dress had tears running down her cheeks. She was a music professor from the state university, someone who'd heard hundreds of performances in her career, and she knew she was witnessing something extraordinary. The governor leaned forward in his seat, completely focused on Elena. And in the very back, Rosa had both hands pressed to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her daughter, her baby girl, command that stage like she'd been born to it. She'd had no idea. Elena had never told her she still practiced, never told her she'd kept their father's gift alive all these years. Elena's hands moved faster, attacking the piano with controlled power. This was the hardest section, where both hands had to maintain impossible speed while still making every note sing. Her father had made her practice this part for weeks. Speed without feeling is just noise, he'd said. But feeling without control is chaos. You need both. She gave them both. Every note was perfect, technically flawless, but it was more than that. It was alive. It breathed. It spoke in a language that went beyond words, straight to something deeper in the human soul. The music built to its climax. Elena's whole body moved with the piece now, swaying slightly, completely absorbed. Her fingers struck the keys with passionate intensity, pulling sounds from the piano that seemed impossible for one person to create. It was like the instrument had been waiting all along for someone who understood it this completely. Then came the final section. The melody returned, transformed now, more powerful than before. Elena played it with such tenderness, such raw emotion, that people who hadn't cried in years found tears in their eyes. It was about longing, about love and loss, about being human and vulnerable and still finding the strength to create something beautiful. The last notes rang out, echoing through the ballroom. Elena's hands stilled on the keys. She sat there for a moment, breathing hard, coming back to herself. Coming back to reality. To the stage and the lights and the 200 people she'd forgotten existed. There was silence. Complete, absolute silence. Elena's heart sank. She'd messed up. They hated it. Then someone started clapping, slow at first. The music professor in the gold dress standing up, applauding with tears still on her cheeks. Then someone else stood. And another. And another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on their feet. The applause crashed over Elena like a wave, thunderous and overwhelming. People weren't just clapping. They were cheering. Some were whistling. The governor was nodding approvingly, applauding with vigor. Victoria sat frozen in her seat, the only person not standing, her face pale. And in the back, Rosa was sobbing openly, clapping so hard her hands had to hurt. Helen, the coordinator, had her arm around Rosa's shoulders, both of them crying and smiling at the same time. Elena stood up from the bench on shaky legs. She'd never performed before, never had to bow or acknowledge applause. She did it awkwardly, a small nod, her face flushed. The applause grew louder. Near the front row, Grandmother Margaret sat with a satisfied smile, clapping steadily. When Elena's eyes found hers, Margaret nodded once. A simple gesture that said, "I told you so." People were standing now, moving toward the stage. The music professor pushed through the crowd first, reaching Elena with tears still streaming down her face. "My name is Dr. Patricia Winters," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I teach at Juilliard." I've been teaching piano for 30 years, and I have never heard anyone your age play with that level of technical mastery and emotional depth. She pulled out a business card with trembling hands. I want to offer you a full scholarship. Right now. We need to talk. But she was interrupted by others crowding around. A man who ran a music foundation. A woman who wanted to sponsor her training. A journalist asking for an interview. Everyone wanted to know where she'd trained, who her teacher was, how they'd never heard of her before. Elena stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed, barely able to process what was happening. Her eyes kept searching the crowd until finally, she saw her mother pushing through, still in her gray uniform. They met at the edge of the stage. Rosa pulled Elena into a fierce hug, both of them crying now. You never told me, Rosa whispered. All this time, you never told me you kept playing. I practiced on paper, Elena said through her tears. I didn't want you to feel bad that we couldn't afford a piano. But Papa taught me and I couldn't let it go. I couldn't forget. Rosa pulled back, holding Elena's face in her hands. He would be so proud. So incredibly proud. Around them, the crowd continued to buzz with excitement and disbelief. Someone was recording on their phone. Someone else was already tweeting about the unknown prodigy at the Ashford Charity Gala. The world was shifting, changing, opening doors that had been locked just moments before. But in that moment, Elena only saw her mother's face, shining with pride and love and wonder. And for the first time in 6 years since her father died and left them with nothing but memories and dreams, Elena let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, those dreams weren't impossible after all. By morning, Elena's life had changed completely. Someone at the gala had recorded her performance on their phone. The video wasn't great quality, taken from several rows back with occasional audience members' heads blocking the view, but the sound was clear enough to hear every note, every moment of that incredible performance, clear enough to understand why 200 people had given her a standing ovation. The person posted it online around midnight with the caption, Unknown Teen Shocks Charity Gala with stunning piano performance. Who is she? By 6 in the morning, the video had 50,000 views. By noon, 2 million. By the end of the day, it had been shared across every social media platform, picked up by news outlets, featured on morning shows. Everyone wanted to know about the mysterious girl in the simple black dress who'd played like her soul depended on it. Elena woke up in the servants' quarters to her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages from classmates she barely knew. Friend requests from strangers. News outlets asking for interviews. It was overwhelming and terrifying and exciting all at once. Her mother sat beside her on the couch, scrolling through her own phone with wide eyes. Mija, look at this. The video has millions of views. Millions. People are calling you a prodigy. A genius. Elena couldn't quite process it. Just yesterday, she'd been invisible. Now the whole world seemed to be looking at her, but not everyone was celebrating. The video had captured more than just Elena's performance. It showed the moment before she played, when the audience was whispering and skeptical. Some people had enhanced the audio and could hear the mocking comments. This should be entertaining. The quiet laughter. The disbelief that the maid's daughter could possibly have talent. And people online were not happy about it. Comments flooded in, criticizing the wealthy crowd for their assumptions and prejudice. Articles were written about class discrimination, and how talent is often overlooked in people from working-class backgrounds. The Ashford name, so carefully cultivated over generations, was suddenly being questioned. The Ashfords almost denied this girl the chance to play because of who her mother was. One viral tweet read, Imagine how many other talented kids are invisible because they don't fit someone's idea of what success looks like. By the second day, reporters were camped outside Ashford Manor. They wanted statements. They wanted to know why Elena had been working there in the first place, why no one had discovered her talent sooner, what the family had to say about the situation. Mrs. Ashford was furious, not at the reporters or the situation, but at Elena. At least that's how it felt when she called Rosa and Elena into the main sitting room that afternoon. Mr. Ashford was there too, looking uncomfortable. Victoria sat in the corner, her face pale and pinched. This has become a circus, Mrs. Ashford said tightly. Our family is being portrayed as villains when all we did was give you an opportunity. Catherine, Grandmother Margaret's voice cut through from the doorway. She walked in, leaning on her cane, her expression stern. Stop, just stop. "Mother, you don't understand the position this has put us in. I understand perfectly. Our family has been treating people like Elena and Rosa as lesser for years. We just never had to face it publicly before." Margaret looked at Mrs. Ashford with something like disappointment. "The girl has extraordinary talent. We almost let our pride and prejudice keep her from sharing it. We should be ashamed." The room fell silent. Mr. Ashford cleared his throat. "Mother's right. This isn't Elena's fault. If anything, we should be grateful. The charity raised more money last night than it has in 5 years. People are calling it the most memorable gala in the conservatory's history." Mrs. Ashford's jaw tightened, but she knew she was cornered. When Grandmother Margaret made up her mind about something, there was no changing it, and the public scrutiny wasn't going away. That evening, the Ashford family made a public statement. They apologized for any discrimination Elena and Rosa had faced. They praised Elena's talent and announced they would be funding her education at whatever institution she chose. Mrs. Ashford read the statement with a stiff smile, every word clearly painful for her to say. Victoria's apology came separately, posted on her social media. It was carefully worded, probably written by a PR team acknowledging her own privilege and promising to do better. Elena read it on her phone and felt nothing. The words were right, but they were empty. Victoria wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she got caught, but Elena tried not to dwell on it. She had bigger things to think about. Dr. Winters, the Juilliard professor, called every day. The scholarship was real. Full tuition, room and board, everything. Elena could start that fall if she wanted. It was the kind of opportunity people dreamed about their whole lives. But before Elena said yes, before she let herself get swept up in this new future that suddenly seemed possible, there was something she needed to do. 3 days after the gala, early in the morning before the Ashfords were awake, Elena asked Grandmother Margaret for one favor. "I'd like to play one more time," Elena said. "Not for an audience. Not for anyone important. Just for my mom. Really play for her, I mean. In a place that's quiet where she can just listen." Margaret smiled. "Use the ballroom. I'll make sure you're not disturbed." That morning, Rosa sat alone in the grand ballroom while Elena played. Not Rachmaninoff this time. Something simpler. A piece her father had written himself. A simple melody he'd composed for Rosa when they first fell in love. He'd played it for her in their tiny apartment in Buenos Aires, before they'd imagined moving to a new country, before everything got complicated. Elena had never forgotten it. She'd kept it alive all these years on her paper keyboards, practicing the notes, keeping her father's love song safe in her fingers and her heart. Rosa cried through the whole thing. When Elena finished, they sat together on the piano bench holding each other, not needing words. This moment, quiet and private and full of love, mattered more than any standing ovation ever could. The next week, Elena accepted the Juilliard scholarship. News outlets covered the story. The impossible dream come true. A girl from nowhere practicing on paper keyboards, now heading to one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Rosa quit her job at Ashford Manor. With the scholarship covering Elena's education and various donors reaching out to help their family, she didn't need to scrub other people's floors anymore. She got a job at a local bakery, something she'd always wanted to do. The hours were better. The pay was decent. She could stand up straight without her back aching. Grandmother Margaret did one more thing before Elena left for school. She established the Miguel Martinez Memorial Scholarship Fund, named after Elena's father. It would provide full funding for talented young musicians from low-income families, kids who practiced on paper keyboards, kids who had the gift but not the opportunity, kids like Elena. The years that followed were hard work but beautiful. Elena studied under the best teachers in the world. She performed in recitals, then competitions, then concerts. She made mistakes and learned from them. She grew not just as a musician but as a person, always remembering where she came from. 2 years after that night at Ashford Manor, Elena stood backstage at Carnegie Hall. She was 18 years old, the youngest performer in a showcase of rising classical musicians. Her hands were shaking, just like they had that night at the gala, but this time it was different. This time she knew what she was capable of. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see the audience filing in. Carnegie Hall seated almost 3,000 people. 3,000. She should have been terrified. But then she saw her mother, front row, center seat, Rosa wore a new dress, deep blue and elegant. She looked different now. The exhaustion had faded from her eyes. She looked proud. She looked happy. Next to her sat Elena's little brother fidgeting in his suit, and beside him, Grandmother Margaret, who had insisted on flying out for the performance. The old woman caught Elena's eye through the curtain and gave her that same small nod she'd given the night Elena proved everyone wrong. The lights dimmed. The announcer introduced her. Elena walked onto the stage and the applause washed over her. She sat at the piano, a beautiful Steinway that would have seemed impossible to touch just 2 years ago. She placed her hands on the keys and thought about her father, about every lesson on that kitchen table, about every paper keyboard, about every moment she thought her dreams were too big for someone like her. Then she began to play. The music filled Carnegie Hall, 3,000 people listening to a girl who'd once been invisible, a girl who'd been told that certain things weren't meant for people like her. A girl who'd proved that talent doesn't care about your last name or your parents' bank account or what job your mother has to do to keep food on the table. As Elena's fingers flew across the keys, she looked out into the audience and saw her mother crying happy tears. She saw Grandmother Margaret smiling. She saw 3,000 people completely absorbed in the music she was creating, and somewhere she knew her father was listening too, proud, so incredibly proud. The music soared. Elena smiled, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged.